mean, I obviously very much welcome the provisions in the bill that help to bring about an amalgamation of the detention schools and, I suppose, formally end the references to St. Patrick's institution. But there is a certain irony in the debate that we are here welcoming something that we really believe shouldn't be here at all. Because if we genuinely mean that it should be a last resort and we should be striving for a society where children are not detained anywhere, then we've got to step back and look at, well, how did we get to where we are now and where do we want to really go, which would be very welcome to have no children in detention at all. And I think we do have to learn from our past. I mean, it's taken decades of recommendations and commitments by successive governments to even get to where we are now. I think we have to point out the fact that 30 years ago, in 1985, the Whittaker Committee recommended the closure of St. Patrick's. 25 years ago, Ireland signed up to the UN rules for the protection of children deprived of their liberty. And one of the conditions in those rules was Rule 29, which states that in all detention facilities, juveniles should be separated from adults unless they're members of the same family. But they were commitments that we haven't abided to or stood by for decades at this stage. And let's face it, we're not a country that moves quickly on anything, but this has to be in some ways a new record, because it wasn't just 25 years of promises. I think we'd have to say that a role in moving to here has been the trenchant and repeated criticism from an absolute roll call of international human rights bodies who've pushed us to this point. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the European Committee on Social Rights, the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, all have repeatedly said that Ireland had to stop the practice of detaining children in adult prisons. But it's taken us decades to get here, and the reality is that the reason for that is that poor and marginalised children who are in trouble have never been high up on the priorities of this country. And if somebody is disadvantaged in their early years, that disadvantages follows them through a lifetime. And we should mark it, given that we're approaching the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the state and the aspiration to treat all children of the nation equally. And I think part of the problem that has been identified by penal reformers is that if we really say that the goal should be prevention, that in order to prevent, you need a long-term strategy, a long-term goal with a steady and sustained intervention throughout a child's life. But unfortunately, a child's life doesn't neatly fit in to the 5-year term of a government cycle. So it is something that's fallen off the list. So if we're saying that this needs to be prioritised, then an overarching strategy that deals with children's lives rather than electoral and government terms has to be pushed more on this issue. I mean, in 2001, the Children's Act said that children should be detained in detention schools under 16 and detention centres between 16 and 18. And then, obviously, detention centres for children were to be places which were suitable for the detention of children of those years, which could never be an environment of an adult prison. But that's where we've continued to keep them there up until March of this year. Let's be clear about it. So I'm very glad that we've ended the practice relatively recently of remanding children to St. Patrick's. But again, we have to say it's an awfully long journey. And why did it take that long to finish the work on Oberstown? The cost of the facility was about 56 million, but it's taken since March 08 to get it built. I obviously fully appreciate that is not the blame for that is not on the shoulders of this government alone or anything like that. But, you know, the new Minister for Justice, when he was appointed after the last election, did put the project on hold originally. But it is good that we are here now. But we got to say, when you're talking about vulnerable young people at a stage in their lives that's going to leave deep scars, a day is too long. Not to mind getting to where we are with Oberstown has taken the best part of a decade. And it is about prioritising young people, and we do have to analyse that, because it's a little bit of a coincidence, if you like, that the 56 million to build Oberstown is 3 million less than the 59 million which the state paid out in claims to members of the public who were victims of Garda malpractice, for example. It's taken 7 years yet to get 56 million for this project, but we were able to get 4 million overnight for the IBRC Commission of Investigation, which we were obviously very glad that the commission was set up, but it wouldn't have needed to be set up in the first place if the Minister for Finance had done his job and answered the questions that he was being asked in the first place. So we can find money when we need to, but in other instances we can't, and I really don't think that is good enough. And we need to learn, I suppose, the lessons of the past. Now, other deputies have made points about the large numbers of children on remand or the small numbers actually, that only 27% of children who were on remand went on to be sentenced to detention in 2013. Obviously that sadly increased in 2014 to 45%, but we do need to step back and say, why were they ever detained at all? And certainly the issue that's been highlighted about remanding children for breaches of bail conditions needs a very, very serious review. As the IPRT has pointed out, no support or supervision is provided to children while on bail. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, many fail to comply with bail conditions imposed, and when they fail to comply with those conditions, they're placed in detention on remand, often for lengthy periods, pre-trial periods, which is a hugely serious issue. I think, even if we leave aside the issues of children over 17 for a minute, the points made by Deputy Wallace and others that 4 in 10 of the children under 16 on custodial remand have an intellectual disability. The 2007 study, which has been highlighted in relation to children in detention, found that children in detention most often come from families with at least one other member with a criminal conviction. The majority present with a history of behavioural problems, mental health difficulties, often drugs and other substance abuse since early childhood. So these are really vulnerable young people. But how have we, in the lifetime of this doll, treated vulnerable young people? The statistics show that poor children and single parents have been the biggest recipients of the cuts. We know the cuts to SNAs and special resource teachers that would help many of these children in their early developing years. Bernardo's had a report about the need to invest an extra 100 million in order to ensure that our primary schools are indeed genuinely free. And if we're serious about dealing with young people in detention, we absolutely have to start with the conditions that young people are born into, the education that they receive, the healthcare that they receive, so that they can fulfil their potential. Now, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we ratified in 1992, says that the detention of children should be a last resort for the shortest possible period of time. But last year, 132 children were sent to detention schools in this state. In Sweden, a country twice the size, with a population twice of ours, only sent 119 individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 to a detention school in 2014. Sweden doesn't allow anybody under the age of 15 to be in prison at all, or detained, and I agree with that. They, in actual fact, closed 4 of their prisons in 2013, despite the fact that there wasn't actually any reduction in crime. And I think we need to develop more of that approach. I'm concerned as well that the bill removes the upper limit. Thanks, Chair. The upper limit of 3 years of detention for children in the 2001 Act. I think this provision has to be absolutely removed. And I think what we need to do, and everybody is talking about it in the contributions, that instead of providing more spaces in detention facilities or moving children from one type of a detention facility to another, our focus should be on preventing children from being sent to detention centres in the first place. And the problem is, as Deputy Wallace highlighted, that where the Irish system sees people who receive a custodial sentence as being an offender, a negative type of person. Other countries emphasise it different, that sentenced individuals are citizens who are primarily regarded as people with needs, who need to be assisted and need to be helped. So not only do we need to, and we're all very glad that we're ending the practice of putting children in adult jails, we need to end the practice of putting children in any form of detention, and I would say in a direction to move to a situation where we have far less adults incarcerated as well, except in very exceptional circumstances.